"Sir, this is a private yacht party. You don't belong here." The sentence cut through the warm Miami harbor air like a blade wrapped in velvet, sharp enough that several nearby guests turned their heads at once. The yacht behind the velvet rope stretched nearly 200 feet long, its white hull glowing under strings of soft gold lights while jazz drifted across the water and the scent of expensive seafood floated from the upper deck. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter rolled across the marina. Luxury had a sound, and tonight it echoed across Biscayne Bay. Standing at the boarding ramp was a tall black man in a tailored charcoal suit, calm eyes steady, posture relaxed like someone who had stepped into rooms like this his entire life. His name was Malik Jefferson. He had walked down the dock alone, no entourage, no flashy watch, no designer logo announcing his arrival. Just quiet confidence and a measured pace. But the woman blocking the ramp wasn't interested in any of that. The hostess, blonde hair pinned neatly, tablet in hand, event badge clipped to her white blazer, looked Malik up and down the way someone inspects luggage that might be headed to the wrong gate. Around them, the dock buzzed with wealthy guests arriving in luxury cars and stepping onto the yacht with easy smiles and effortless acceptance. Malik waited while she tapped her tablet screen, her lips tightening slightly. Then she looked up again, her expression already decided. "I don't see your name," she said, loud enough for the couple behind him to hear. "This is a private event." A man in a navy blazer paused nearby, curiosity rising like a tide. Someone else slowed their walk toward the ramp. The hostess shifted the velvet rope just slightly, a small gesture that closed the entrance without raising her voice. "The guest list is very specific tonight," she added, "and we can't allow uninvited people on board." Malik didn't react. Not immediately. The harbor breeze moved lightly across the dock, rustling the flags tied to nearby masts while reflections of city lights shimmered across the dark water. From the upper deck, a saxophone note floated downward, smooth and effortless. A few guests nearby exchanged glances, the subtle kind people give when they sense tension but aren't sure yet which side of it they'll land on. Malik simply looked at the yacht for a moment, then back at the hostess. His expression didn't change. He wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. If anything, he looked patient, like a man watching a familiar scene unfold again. The hostess cleared her throat slightly, tapping the tablet once more as if technology might suddenly validate the judgment she had already made. "Sir," she said again, this time firmer, "this party isn't open to the public." Behind Malik, another guest chuckled quietly. Someone farther down the dock lifted a phone, sensing the beginning of something interesting. But Malik Jefferson remained exactly where he stood, calm as the water stretching beyond the marina lights, his voice finally breaking the moment with quiet certainty. "Then you might want to check that list again." The hostess stared at Malik Jefferson for a moment, as if the calm certainty in his voice had interrupted the script she had already written in her mind. Around them, the marina lights reflected across the dark water like scattered gold, while the 200-foot yacht behind the velvet rope pulsed with music and conversation. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved along the upper deck, carrying trays of champagne, while laughter drifted down the staircase that curved toward the dock. Everything about the night spoke the language of exclusivity. Everything except the man standing in front of her who refused to move. She glanced back down at her tablet and began scrolling again with quick, impatient taps, the glow from the screen lighting her face. Malik did not lean forward. He did not try to see the list. He simply waited. The couple behind him shifted their weight slightly, curious now. The man in the navy blazer who had paused earlier crossed his arms and watched the interaction with open interest. Moments like this traveled fast in places like Miami Harbor, where expensive boats and expensive egos floated side by side. The hostess exhaled sharply and shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "Your name is not here." She tilted the tablet slightly, as if the blank confirmation screen was the final authority in the matter. "This event is invitation only. The guests tonight are investors, executives, and partners." The subtle pause before the last word hung in the air. Malik understood the implication immediately. He had heard variations of it before, but his expression did not change. The harbor breeze moved gently across the dock, carrying the faint smell of salt water and grilled seafood from the yacht's outdoor kitchen. Somewhere above them, a burst of laughter rose from the top deck, where the party had already reached full rhythm. Malik adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket slowly, the movement calm and deliberate. Then there must be a mistake, he said quietly. The hostess gave a short laugh that did not quite reach her eyes. Sir, there is not a mistake. Her voice was polite but carried the unmistakable tone of someone ending a conversation. She slid the velvet rope a few inches farther across the boarding ramp. If you would like to enjoy the marina, there are several public lounges down the dock. The suggestion landed softly, but the meaning was clear. A small group approaching from the parking lot slowed their steps, sensing the tension gathering near the ramp. One of them whispered something to the others while glancing toward Malik. Phones appeared subtly in hands. Not openly recording yet, but ready. Miami society loved a spectacle almost as much as it loved luxury. Malik noticed none of it, or perhaps he noticed all of it, and chose not to react. His gaze moved briefly across the yacht behind the hostess. The vessel was impossible to miss. 200 feet of polished white steel and glass rising 3 decks above the waterline with chrome railings and panoramic windows glowing against the night sky. Along the side of the hull, the yacht's name, curved in elegant silver letters illuminated by soft deck lighting. A crew member walked along the upper balcony, adjusting a line of lanterns that swayed slightly in the breeze. Malik watched the scene for a quiet moment, as if appreciating the craftsmanship of the vessel itself. Then he looked back at the hostess. You are sure you checked the full list? He asked. The question was simple, but something in his tone made the hostess straighten slightly. She tapped the screen again, scrolling faster this time as though speed alone would reinforce her conclusion. Every name, she replied. Twice. The man in the navy blazer stepped a little closer, now openly invested in the exchange. Another guest behind him murmured, maybe he just has the wrong boat. The comment drew a few quiet chuckles from nearby listeners. The hostess heard it too and allowed a faint smile to appear. She gestured toward the row of yachts stretching down the marina, each glowing with its own version of luxury. There are a lot of events tonight, she said. You might want to double-check your invitation. Malik Jefferson finally smiled slightly, not embarrassed, not defensive, just amused in a way that did not match the situation unfolding around him. The quiet confidence in that expression caused a small ripple of uncertainty to pass across the hostess's face, though she quickly masked it with professionalism. Malik looked past her once more toward the grand staircase leading up to the yacht's main deck, where the music continued to play. Then he returned his attention to the woman holding the tablet, and spoke again in the same calm voice. I am certain I am at the right boat. The hostess held Malik Jefferson's gaze for a moment longer, as if she expected him to finally step aside and accept the quiet rejection that had already played out in her mind. But Malik did not move. The marina around them continued its rhythm of wealth and celebration, engines of luxury cars humming softly in the background while waves tapped gently against the polished hulls of neighboring yachts. The 200-foot vessel behind the velvet rope gleamed under warm lighting, music drifting across the dock like an invitation that somehow stopped a few feet short of where Malik stood. Guests continued to arrive, stepping around the growing circle of curiosity forming near the ramp. The man in the navy blazer leaned slightly toward another guest and murmured something that drew a small laugh. A woman in a silver evening dress slowed her walk just enough to watch the exchange unfold. Moments like this had a gravity of their own. People pretended not to stare, but they always did. The hostess tapped her tablet again with renewed confidence, as if repeating the motion would make the answer stronger. Sir, I do not know how else to explain this, she said with a carefully measured smile. Your name is not on the guest list. I have confirmed it multiple times. Her voice was still polite, but the tone carried the quiet certainty of someone who believed the matter had already been settled. Malik listened without interruption. He glanced briefly toward the crowd gathering near the ramp, noticing the subtle shifts in posture and attention. A few guests now stood several feet away, pretending to admire the marina view while their focus remained fixed on the conversation. One man lifted his phone slightly before lowering it again when the hostess looked his way. Malik returned his gaze to the yacht behind her. The vessel's upper deck curved elegantly under strings of lights, while silhouettes of party guests moved against the glowing windows. Someone raised a glass in celebration inside. The saxophone continued to play somewhere above them. Everything about the evening suggested that this event had been carefully designed to impress. Malik finally spoke again, his voice calm and steady. Then perhaps the list is incomplete. The hostess tilted her head slightly, as if amused by the suggestion. Our list is never incomplete, she replied. Every guest attending tonight confirmed their presence days ago. Her eyes moved briefly over Malik's suit again, the subtle evaluation returning. If you received an invitation, it may have been for a different event. The comment drew another quiet chuckle from the man in the navy blazer, who had now positioned himself close enough to hear every word. Another guest behind him whispered something about mistaken docks and wrong parties. Malik let the moment pass without reaction. He had stood in rooms like this before. Rooms where judgment arrived before introductions. Rooms where assumptions moved faster than facts. Years earlier, he had walked into a hotel conference ballroom in Chicago wearing a simple suit not unlike the one he wore tonight. The man at the registration desk had glanced at him briefly before pointing toward the catering entrance and suggesting the staff check in around the back hallway. Malik had remembered the look on that man's face when the event host later introduced him as the keynote speaker. The memory crossed his mind, now not with anger, but with the quiet familiarity of someone who had seen the pattern repeat itself more times than he could count. Back on the dock, the hostess straightened her posture slightly, as if deciding the conversation had gone on long enough. She shifted the velvet rope another inch across the ramp, a polite barrier reinforced by tone rather than force. I am going to ask you to step aside so the arriving guests can board, she said. Behind Malik, the small gathering of observers grew by another 2 or 3 people, curiosity spreading through the marina like a whisper moving. From table to table, Malik remained exactly where he was. His eyes moved once more across the elegant lines of the yacht and the glowing silver name along its hull. Then he returned his attention to the hostess holding the tablet. His voice remained calm, but this time it carried a quiet certainty that made the nearby listeners lean in slightly without realizing it. I assure you, Malik Jefferson said slowly, this is the correct yacht. The hostess studied Malik Jefferson for another long second, as if expecting uncertainty to appear somewhere in his face, but there was none. The marina lights shimmered across the dark water while the music from the yacht continued to float down the staircase behind her, smooth saxophone blending with the low hum of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter from the upper deck. Guests arriving along the dock slowed their steps again, sensing that the moment at the velvet rope had not ended the way the hostess expected. The man in the navy blazer folded his arms and leaned casually against a dock post, clearly entertained now. Another couple stopped a few yards away, pretending to admire the view of Biscayne Bay while quietly listening. The hostess inhaled slowly through her nose, patience beginning to thin behind her professional smile. Sir, she said, tapping her tablet again. The correct yacht is the one where your name is actually listed. A few nearby guests exchanged amused glances. One man whispered something under his breath that caused a short ripple of laughter through the small crowd forming near the ramp. Malik noticed the reaction but did not acknowledge it. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the glowing name along the yacht's polished hull again, the elegant lettering reflecting against the water. For a moment, his expression softened as if he were remembering something. Because the truth was, this was not the first time a moment like this had unfolded in front of him. Years earlier in Los Angeles, he had arrived at a charity fundraiser held inside a 5-star hotel ballroom overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The event had been filled with venture capitalists and executives from some of the largest companies on the West Coast. Malik had walked through the lobby wearing a simple navy suit, nothing flashy, nothing designed to announce his status. At the registration table, a young coordinator had glanced at him, quickly before directing him toward the service hallway, explaining politely that catering staff should enter through the rear corridor near the loading dock. Malik had thanked her calmly and waited nearby until the event host arrived moments later and greeted him with a handshake that stopped the entire room. The look on the coordinator's face when she realized the man she had redirected was the keynote speaker stayed with him long after the event ended. Standing on the dock tonight, that memory passed quietly through Malik's mind like a familiar breeze. The same assumption, the same quick judgment. Back in the present, the hostess shifted her weight and glanced toward the arriving guests behind Malik, as if concerned that the growing delay might interrupt the flow of the party. I really do not want to keep everyone waiting, she said firmly. If you would step aside, I can allow the confirmed guests to board. The velvet rope moved another inch across the ramp as she spoke, reinforcing the invisible line she had drawn between Malik and the celebration behind her. The man in the navy blazer chuckled again and murmured something about exclusive lists. Someone farther back finally lifted a phone openly, curiosity overcoming politeness. Malik Jefferson remained perfectly still. His calm presence began to feel almost out of place against the rising tension around him, like a steady anchor in water that had begun to ripple. He looked once more across the marina where rows of yachts stretched out under the glow of city lights. The breeze carried the scent of salt and citrus from a nearby bar. The evening was beautiful in the way only Miami nights could be. Then Malik returned his gaze to the hostess. His voice remained level and respectful, but the certainty behind it made the nearby listeners grow quiet again. "I understand the importance of a guest list," he said slowly. "But I also know this yacht was not meant to leave the dock without me tonight." The statement hung in the warm harbor air, calm and simple, yet something about the way he said it caused a few of the onlookers to exchange puzzled glances. The hostess frowned slightly, clearly unsure whether she had heard him correctly. Malik Jefferson did not move. He simply waited, the lights of the yacht reflecting softly in his eyes as the music continued to drift across the water behind her. The words Malik Jefferson had just spoken lingered in the warm night air above the dock, quiet but unmistakable, and for the first time the hostess hesitated before responding. The marina behind him remained alive with movement, engines humming softly as luxury cars pulled up along the curb while guests in tailored suits and evening dresses continued drifting toward the glowing yacht. But something about the calm certainty in Malik's voice slowed the rhythm of the moment. The small crowd that had gathered near the velvet rope leaned a little closer now, curiosity replacing amusement. The hostess blinked once as if resetting her patience and then forced a polite smile back onto her face. "Sir," she said carefully, "this yacht is not waiting for anyone who is not on the guest list." She lifted the tablet again as though the screen itself would confirm her authority. The man in the navy blazer chuckled quietly beside the dock post. "Maybe he owns a smaller boat somewhere," he murmured to the couple beside him. The comment sparked another ripple of laughter through the nearby listeners. Malik heard it, but did not acknowledge it. His attention remained on the hostess, steady and unhurried, like someone watching a clock tick down toward a moment only he understood. The music from the upper deck swelled briefly as a new song began, the bass drifting down the staircase while silhouettes of party guests moved behind the glass railings above. Waiters passed along the balcony carrying silver trays while the lights reflected across the water in long shimmering lines. Everything about the scene suggested the evening had already reached its perfect rhythm. Yet the small moment at the dock continued to stretch longer than expected. The hostess shifted her stance again, clearly eager to end the interruption. "I am going to ask one final time," she said, her voice firmer now. "Please step aside so our invited guests can board." A few more phones appeared in the crowd, not openly recording yet, but ready. Malik Jefferson noticed the subtle change in attention around him. The same pattern he had seen before in conference halls, hotel lobbies, private clubs, and corporate receptions. A quiet judgment forming before introductions were even made. The memory of another evening surfaced in his mind. Nearly a decade earlier, he had arrived at a luxury dealership in Dallas to meet with a group of investors who were discussing a technology partnership. Malik had walked in wearing jeans and a simple jacket after flying in from a manufacturing site outside Austin. The receptionist had glanced at him quickly and explained that the showroom floor was for serious buyers only. Minutes later, the dealership manager had rushed out from his office after recognizing Malik's name on the appointment schedule, greeting him loudly in front of the same employees who had assumed he was browsing without purpose. Standing on the dock tonight, Malik remembered the silence that followed that moment in Dallas. The same silence now hovered lightly around the velvet rope. Back in the present, the hostess exhaled again, frustration beginning to edge into her tone. "Sir, if you do not have an invitation, then there is nothing more to discuss." The man in the navy blazer nodded as if the conclusion had already been reached. A woman nearby whispered something about exclusive events and mistaken invitations. Malik finally shifted his posture slightly, straightening the sleeve of his charcoal suit before glancing once more toward the elegant yacht behind the hostess. His eyes paused on the illuminated silver name across the hull, the letters reflecting softly against the water. Then he returned his attention to the woman holding the tablet. When he spoke again, his voice remained calm, but this time it carried the quiet weight of someone who knew exactly how the next few minutes would unfold. "The invitation is not the reason I am here," Malik Jefferson said slowly. "The reason I am here is because this yacht belongs to me." The sentence landed without drama, delivered in the same steady tone he had used since arriving on the dock. For a brief moment, no one reacted at all. The marina lights flickered across the water. The saxophone continued to play from somewhere above. Then a few of the nearby guests exchanged confused glances as the meaning of his words slowly began to settle in. For a moment, the entire dock seemed to pause as Malik Jefferson's words settled into the warm Miami night air. The music from the yacht continued drifting across the marina, smooth saxophone notes floating above the quiet ripple of water against the dock. But the small crowd gathered near the velvet rope had fallen completely silent. The hostess stared at Malik as if she had misheard him, the tablet still raised loosely in her hand. Her professional smile flickered for a second before returning, slightly tighter this time. "I am sorry," she said slowly, her tone careful and measured. "But that is not possible." A few of the onlookers exchanged glances. The man in the navy blazer let out a soft laugh and shook his head as if the situation had just crossed into absurd territory. "That is a new one," he muttered to the couple beside him. "Owns the yacht." The couple smiled politely, but their eyes shifted back toward Malik, curiosity now replacing the earlier amusement. Malik did not respond to the comment. His posture remained relaxed, shoulders squared, gaze steady on the hostess in front of him. The breeze from Biscayne Bay moved gently across the dock, carrying the scent of salt water and citrus from a nearby bar, while the yacht's lights reflected across the marina like scattered gold. On the upper deck, silhouettes moved past wide glass panels where the party continued without interruption. The hostess lowered her tablet slightly and folded one arm across her waist as if reinforcing her authority. "Sir," she continued, "the owner of this vessel is already on board preparing to welcome the guests." Her voice carried the quiet certainty of someone repeating information she believed could not possibly be challenged. The man in the navy blazer nodded as if confirming her statement for the audience that had gathered. Someone farther back whispered, "This is getting interesting." Malik Jefferson finally glanced toward the yacht again, his eyes traveling slowly along the polished railings and glowing windows before returning to the hostess. He had seen this reaction before. Not disbelief exactly, but the confident rejection of a truth that did not match the picture people had already formed in their minds. Years earlier, during a technology conference in San Francisco, he had walked into a private investor's lounge at a waterfront hotel. A security attendant had politely explained that the room was reserved for executive partners only. Malik had thanked the man for the information and taken a seat in the lobby nearby. 10 minutes later, the conference organizer had hurried through the hallway searching for him, apologizing repeatedly after realizing the man they were waiting to introduce as the keynote investor had been sitting quietly outside the entire time. The memory passed quickly through Malik's mind as he stood on the dock tonight. The pattern never surprised him anymore. Back in the present, the hostess took a small step forward and gently shifted the velvet rope again, reinforcing the invisible boundary between Malik and the yacht. "I do not know who told you this story," she said with polite firmness, "but the owner of this yacht is hosting tonight's event personally." The man in the navy blazer smiled wider at that remark and glanced at Malik as if waiting to see how he would recover from the contradiction. Several guests now openly watched the exchange, the earlier laughter replaced by a quiet anticipation that something unusual might happen next. Malik Jefferson reached calmly into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed his phone. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, the kind of motion that suggested he had all the time in the world. The hostess raised an eyebrow as she watched him unlock the screen. "Calling someone will not change the guest list," she said lightly. Malik looked at the phone for a moment, then lifted his eyes back to her with the same calm expression he had carried since arriving at the dock. "You are right," he said evenly. "The guest list will not change." The crowd leaned in slightly without realizing it. Malik tapped a single contact on the screen and raised the phone to his ear while the marina lights shimmered across the water behind him. His voice remained quiet but clear enough for the nearby listeners to hear every word. "Captain," Malik Jefferson said calmly into the phone, "I believe there is some confusion at the boarding ramp." The phone remained at Malik Jefferson's ear for only a few seconds, but in those seconds the quiet tension along the dock thickened like humidity before a summer storm. The hostess watched him with thinly disguised impatience, her expression caught somewhere between annoyance and disbelief. Around them the small crowd of guests had grown larger, curiosity spreading down the marina as more people slowed their walk toward the yacht. The man in the navy blazer leaned forward slightly, eager not to miss a word. Malik listened to the voice on the other end of the line for a moment, and then spoke again in the same calm tone he had carried since arriving at the dock. "Yes," he said simply. "I am. Standing at the boarding ramp." He paused briefly while the voice responded. Then Malik lowered the phone from his ear and slipped it back into the inside pocket of his jacket. The hostess lifted her eyebrows. "Finished?" she asked lightly, the edge of sarcasm barely hidden beneath the polite surface of her voice. Malik nodded once. "They are on their way." The answer only encouraged another quiet laugh from the man in the navy blazer. "Well, this should be good," he murmured to the couple beside him. The hostess folded her arms across her waist and shifted her weight onto one heel, clearly confident that nothing about the situation had changed. "Sir," she said, "I assure you that the captain of this vessel is extremely busy preparing for tonight's departure." Her tone carried the steady confidence of someone who believed the conversation was nearing its inevitable conclusion. Malik did not respond immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the staircase leading up to the yacht's main deck, where the music continued to float down into the marina. Guests above the railing leaned against polished chrome bars, their laughter drifting across the warm Florida night. The yacht looked exactly as it had when Malik first commissioned its construction 3 years earlier. Every detail designed to create a quiet sense of power rather than loud display. Standing on the dock, now he felt the familiar calm that came with knowing something the rest of the room did not yet understand. Behind the hostess, the lights along the gangway flickered gently in the breeze. For a moment, nothing happened. The hostess tapped the edge of her tablet against her palm as if counting down the seconds until Malik finally accepted defeat and stepped aside. The onlookers whispered among themselves, the earlier humor fading slightly as curiosity deepened. Then movement appeared at the top of the yacht staircase. A tall man in a Navy captain's uniform stepped quickly onto the landing, scanning the dock below. The gold insignia on his shoulders caught the marina lights as he moved with sudden urgency down the steps. The hostess noticed him first and straightened slightly, assuming the captain had come to help resolve the minor disturbance at the ramp. But the moment his eyes found Malik Jefferson standing beside the velvet rope, his expression changed instantly. The captain quickened his pace, descending the remaining steps with the focused stride of someone who had just realized an important guest had been waiting far too long. Conversations along the dock faded into a hush as several people recognized the seriousness in his movement. The man in the navy blazer lowered his voice mid-sentence. The hostess blinked once, confused by the sudden shift in the captain's demeanor. When he reached the dock, he walked directly past the velvet rope without hesitation. For a brief second, the hostess lifted her hand as if to explain the situation, but the captain had already stopped in front of Malik Jefferson. His posture straightened sharply, and his voice carried a clear note of respect that silenced every whisper nearby. "Mr. Jefferson," the captain said firmly, "I apologize for the delay. We have been expecting you." The words landed across the dock like the sudden drop of a curtain. The hostess froze where she stood, tablet still clutched in her hand. The man in the navy blazer blinked twice, as if replaying the last minute in his mind. Around them, the small crowd of guests fell completely silent. Malik Jefferson offered the captain a calm nod, the same quiet composure still resting on his face. Then he glanced briefly toward the velvet rope that had blocked the entrance only moments earlier and spoke in a voice that carried easily through the still air. "It appears," Malik said gently, "that there has been a misunderstanding." The silence that followed the captain's words spread across the dock like a ripple across still water. For several seconds, no one moved. The hostess remained frozen beside the velvet rope, her tablet still in her hand, her expression caught between disbelief and sudden realization. Around her, the small crowd of guests who had gathered to watch the confrontation now looked from Malik Jefferson to the captain and back again, as if trying to recalculate everything they had assumed during the last 10 minutes. The man in the navy blazer slowly straightened from the dock post where he had been leaning, his confident amusement disappearing from his face. The captain stood respectfully in front of Malik, posture straight, the gold stripes on his uniform sleeves catching the marina lights. "Mr. Jefferson," he repeated calmly, his voice steady but unmistakably respectful. "The crew has been preparing for your arrival. The event schedule was waiting on your confirmation." A murmur moved quietly through the onlookers. Someone whispered, "Did he say Jefferson?" Another voice replied softly, "Wait a minute." Phones that had earlier hovered uncertainly now lifted slightly higher, curiosity turning into a sudden awareness that the situation had shifted completely. The hostess finally found her voice, though it arrived weaker than before. "Captain," she said quickly, trying to regain her professional tone. "This gentleman claimed he was the owner of the yacht." The captain turned his head toward her with a puzzled look that lasted only a second before his expression settled into quiet clarity. "He did not claim it," the captain said calmly. "He is." The words landed heavier than the music drifting down from the deck above. Several guests exchanged stunned glances. The man in the navy blazer looked down briefly at the polished dock beneath his shoes, as if wishing the earlier laughter had never happened. Malik Jefferson remained exactly as he had been throughout the entire encounter, calm, composed, and completely unshaken. The marina breeze moved gently through the space between them, while the yacht behind the captain continued glowing under its soft deck lighting. Malik glanced briefly toward the vessel again, the silver name along its hull reflecting in the dark water. Then he returned his attention to the hostess who now stood very still beside the velvet rope that had blocked him moments earlier. Her confidence had faded, replaced by a careful silence as the realization settled across her face. "I believe," Malik said quietly, "that you mentioned the owner was already on board." The hostess opened her mouth as if to respond, but the words never quite formed. Around them the crowd watched with growing awareness, the earlier amusement replaced by a quiet respect for the man who had never once raised his voice. The captain stepped aside slightly and gestured toward the gangway. "Your guests are waiting upstairs, Mr. Jefferson," he said. "Shall we begin boarding?" Malik nodded once. As the captain lifted the velvet rope and held it open, the symbolic barrier that had separated Malik from the yacht only minutes earlier disappeared completely. The moment did not need any dramatic gesture. The change in the room had already happened. Malik stepped forward calmly onto the ramp, the polished wood reflecting the warm lights from the deck above. As he passed the hostess, he paused briefly, not out of anger or triumph, but out of something quieter. His voice carried the same calm tone it had from the beginning. "Next time," Malik Jefferson said gently, "it may help to ask a question before making a decision." The hostess lowered her gaze slightly, the lesson landing without another word. Malik continued up the gangway beside the captain while the crowd along the dock watched in silence. A moment later, the music from the yacht swelled again as the door to the upper deck opened and the host of the evening finally arrived exactly where he had intended to be all along. The soft glow of the yacht's upper deck lights stretched across the water as Malik Jefferson stepped onto the main deck, the quiet rhythm of the party gradually shifting the moment he appeared beside the captain. Conversations that had been flowing easily around small glass tables slowed as several guests turned to see who had just arrived. A few of them recognized him immediately. One man near the bar straightened his posture and whispered to the woman beside him, and within seconds the subtle wave of recognition began moving across the deck. Malik did not rush. He walked with the same calm pace he had carried from the dock, greeting the first group of guests with a polite nod before accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. The skyline of Miami shimmered beyond the marina, towers of light rising above the bay, while the music shifted into a smooth rhythm that filled the evening air. The captain paused beside him briefly. "Everything is ready whenever you are, Mr. Jefferson," he said quietly. Malik thanked him with a small nod before turning his attention to the guests who had gathered along the railing. Many of them were investors, technology founders, and business partners who had traveled from across the country to attend the launch celebration for Malik's newest maritime technology venture. Several had expected him to arrive earlier. None of them knew the reason for the short delay at the dock. From the upper deck, Malik could still see the boarding ramp below, where the velvet rope now hung open, the same entrance that had blocked him only minutes earlier. The hostess remained near the bottom of the ramp, standing quietly as new guests stepped past her toward the yacht. The earlier confidence in her posture had softened into careful attention as she checked each arriving name with greater patience than before. Malik watched the scene for a moment, not with anger, but with the quiet reflection of someone who understood how quickly assumptions could shape a moment. A memory crossed his mind again, not of the misunderstanding tonight, but of the long road that had brought him here. Years earlier, Malik had worked late nights in a small office overlooking the Detroit River while developing the first software platform that would eventually fund everything he now owned. Back then, he had walked into meetings where people doubted his experience before hearing his ideas. He had learned something important during those years. True authority did not need to arrive loudly. It only needed to remain steady long enough for the truth to catch up. On the deck behind him, a guest approached with a warm smile. "Malik," the man said, shaking his hand. "We were wondering when you would appear." Malik smiled in return. "I arrived right on time," he replied calmly. Laughter moved lightly through the group, and the music continued to flow across the deck as more guests joined the conversation. For most of them, the evening would simply be remembered as a beautiful event on a remarkable yacht under the lights of Miami Harbor. Yet the quiet moment at the dock would remain in the memory of those who had witnessed it, not because anyone had shouted or argued, but because the calm confidence of one man had turned a moment of judgment into a lesson that needed no explanation. A few minutes later, Malik stepped forward to welcome his guests formally. The conversations faded as people gathered around him beneath the warm deck lights. He looked across the group with the same steady composure that had carried him through the entire evening. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Malik Jefferson said clearly, his voice carrying easily over the music and the gentle movement of the water. "This yacht was built for many reasons, but one of them is to remind us that opportunity should never depend on what someone expects when they first see you." The words hung quietly in the warm air above the marina. Around him, the guests listened with thoughtful expressions while the lights of the city reflected across the bay. Malik raised his glass slightly toward the skyline. "Respect," he continued calmly, "should always come before assumptions." The guests nodded and lifted their glasses in response while the music swelled gently across the deck, and the yacht prepared to leave the dock for the night, carrying with it a story that had begun with a simple sentence at a velvet rope and ended with a quiet reminder that dignity never needs to raise its voice.